Good afternoon and welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Very special day. It's a day of love today, and I would love to welcome back to the event space Esteban Toro. What's going on, brother? How you doing today?
Hey, Scott, I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely wonderful. I'm super excited. For those of you who don't know what we're about to get into, Esteban is going to share with us the right exposure. He's gonna be talking about exposure, which is it's important, right? It's important to expose properly.
Very important when we're learning photography. It's the basics. So today we will start learning how to use our camera. We will get it in our hands and start practicing. So I will let you introduce, then I will introduce my part. I was just jumping into your part.
No, I love it. I love it. You're ready to jump in. You're ready to go. I'm super excited too. We were talking about it. We were chit-chatting beforehand before we went live to everybody. And I love events like this. I love talking about stuff, basic photography things, because even if you're a seasoned pro, there's always something you can learn from somebody else, something that you haven't thought of before that maybe will change the way you utilize your workflow or just how you photograph. So I'm going to be here as a student as well, listening to Esteban. I want to give a special thank you to our sponsors for this event. Sony, thank you very much for sponsoring this. But otherwise, Esteban, I'm going to hand over the mic to you, and I'm going to put my thinking cap on. So I'm ready.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for joining here. This is our second lesson that we will be having about basic photography. We are learning how to use our camera. We will be learning all the process of how I take my images. If you missed the last episode where I explained who I am and the images that I have been capturing in more than 50 countries, feel free to jump into B&H YouTube channel and find it out. All these sessions are recorded. Don't forget that we will have as well a live practice. We will meet in New York City just to practice with our cameras. So if you have your camera nearby you, just take it, because today we will start practicing a little bit. I will try to go slowly to explain complex things that are sometimes very hard to understand when you're just starting. But of course, as soon as you progress into practicing and practicing, it will become easier and easier. If you get lost, don't hesitate to ask any question. Don't hesitate to, if you think like, oh, but how I will create this picture, or can you explain more, I'll be totally open to answer those questions. So let me share with you my screen. I want to explain to you what is the exposure time, that sometimes we also call it the shutter speed, or the exposure, or the time, or there are many ways that people like to call this setting. And we will be talking about three basic settings that can really modify what our images look like. So the first one will be the shutter speed, then we'll be talking about the aperture, and then we'll be talking about the ISO. So I will start by the exposure time. I will explain slowly what it means, and I will show you some examples of what it means to use certain settings in your camera, or if you use another one. So let's just jump into that. So if you look carefully to the graphic that I'm showing you, you will see a bunch of numbers and text. So I'm just going to start for the top left side of the image, where you see that it says shorter exposure time. And then you see that there is a person that is running. If the number goes to 1,800, 1,400, 1,200, 1,500, 250, the person seems to be frozen. As I go to a longer number, let's say to longer time, there is motion and it's what we call a longer exposure time. It will affect two things when we're talking about it. The first thing that will affect is the light. So depending on what you choose on your camera, you will be changing exactly, like you will change the light, but you will also change some settings that are happening in your camera. So let me share with you a little bit my camera here, and I want to show you how it feels like. So I have here my Sony A7R4, and I have the setting that here, let me make sure that you can see it, but here with this dial over here, I can scroll and I can change my shutter speed. So if I go to a setting that it's very, very short, like 1/8,000 of a second, what I'm creating is that I'm freezing an image, but also it creates that I'm also freezing the picture. So those things are very, very important to consider when you want to create a photograph, depending on what you want to do. So the first thing that you will notice here in my picture, like you will see my screen, is that basically looks black. There is nothing, like it's completely dark. And the reason for that is not because my camera is off. The reason for that is that if I just start opening shutter speed and making it longer, I don't know if you guys can see a little bit more there, but what is changing is that I'm changing the shutter speed, and with that I'm allowing the camera sensor to receive way more light. So what is happening there is that I'm just increasing the amount of light that the camera is receiving, and with that I'm able to actually see what I'm capturing. But then there is another issue that it's like, okay, I'm going to change the shutter speed, that's important, but I also need to understand how is that going to affect my picture. So let me share with you some images so we can start discussing it. So this is the graphic. I want you to consider what I'm showing you, and then we'll go back to it and discuss how I capture certain of these photographs. The first picture that I'm showing you here, what is happening here? Imagine how this scene looks like. This is the Holi festival in India. It's a very like intense, let's say, kind of like a crazy feeling where everyone is celebrating, everything is happening super fast. And of course, the first thing that I want to take care of is to capture the light correctly. So I want the picture to be correctly exposed, and we will get to what's right exposure a little bit after. So, but basically I want the viewer, that in this case is you, to be able to understand and see what's the image, how it looks like, and like the whole scene, that there is nothing that is too dark, there is nothing that is too overexposed with a lot of light. But I also want to freeze the action. So to me, it's important that while I'm here, while I'm taking this picture, everything is happening fast. And in the same way, I have to adjust my settings. So it will allow me to capture that moment where actually you can see details like the guy is screaming, and you can feel that intensity of how he's getting there in that emotion. How do I get that if I use my previous graphic? So basically what I'm doing here is using some of the times that I have on the left side. If you look, it's like 1/500, 1/1000, 1/2000 of a second. All these times will help me to freeze the action of something that is happening very, very fast. So every time when I'm in the Holi festival, I'm thinking, what do I want to get? Do I want to freeze something that is happening in front of me? Or do I want to create something more like a long exposure that will create this feeling of motion, that something is moving, that there is like a ghost? Or we will get to that. Don't worry, we will get to that. But basically, at this time, I'm choosing, I want to freeze the action. So before I even press the shutter, before I even set up my settings in my camera, all I have to do is think what I want to get in the final image. And if you look carefully, I'm writing here that actually if I use a shorter exposure time, I will have less light entering my sensor, which means that I will need to compensate the light that I'm not letting the camera to receive with the other two settings that I already mentioned to you, the aperture and the ISO, but we will get to that. And I also want to go to the longer exposure times, but first I want to show you some other examples that will clarify what I'm telling you. In this case, I'm waiting with my producer, and he told me, like, if you wait carefully here at this location, usually monks eat only once per day, and it's at 11 a.m. So there are always a few monks that are running late, and they don't want to like miss the only opportunity they have to eat during the day. So it's a really good opportunity to take a picture. So I'm just waiting there patiently with him, and I know that some action is going to happen. So since I know that some action might happen in front of my camera, I'm just setting my shutter speed to something very, very short that will allow me to first capture the right light, and second, to capture and freeze the action. I know that at this moment you're thinking like, okay, but how do you know what is the right light and what is a wrong light, or how to distinguish that? Don't worry, we will get to that. Let's go step by step. So I'm just pointing my camera, I'm waiting for something to happen, and then I see entering this monk coming, running, and I'm just pressing the camera and I'm just waiting for the right moment. I'm looking through my viewfinder and I have probably, and let's check, the good thing is that I can check that information. And for this picture, I use 1/250 of a second. So 250 of a second is what I use for this photograph, just to capture and freeze the moment. So if you want to look where is 250, here you can see in the graphic that here it is, between 1/500 and 1/25. Here is 1/250, and this is the shutter speed that I'm using. And if you look, it's like effectively it's freezing the action that is happening in front of the camera. So this is another situation. Look at this picture. This might result very, very tricky. But again, you have an easy sign to understand that this was also a frozen image. And the reason for that is the kid that is jumping here. You see his legs just falling into the water. And that's also, again, planning the moment. So what's happening here is that I'm sitting in front of these guys who are playing, jumping to this, into this water here, and I'm just waiting for them to do something. So I'm just sitting with my camera, waiting for the right action. I know they are moving a lot, they are jumping, they are just playing a game, and I'm just documenting that with my camera. So in the moment that I know that one of these guys will jump or will do something, I have to be prepared. And then I try to frame the right action. And I thought like, okay, maybe I can get one of these guys falling down into the water. And that's where I get this picture. It's like one frame, and that's all. That's the picture. And let's look at the time, and it's 1,000 of a second. So if you look, I'm using 1,000 of a second. If you again are wondering how you choose that in your camera, if you're using any full frame Sony camera or any Sony Alpha, you will have this dial here that you move. And with this wheel over here, you control the shutter speed. If you're using, let's say, a Nikon, a Canon, Fujifilm, any other camera, I'm sure you will have a controller like this. Just look for that controller. If not, I will highly suggest you just to Google it or have your manual on the side and look where is the controller for the shutter speed. You can later change all this, like where you control all the settings in your camera, but basically we will start by that. So it's there. That helps you to freeze the action. This is an interesting picture because it's also tricky. And you look at a picture like this, and then you wonder like, okay, this picture is a motion one or is something that is frozen in time? And this is what is a little bit strange of having the class like virtual and online. And I would love to have you all just participating here and answering these questions. But let me answer for you. What is happening here? I'm flying in the helicopter. A helicopter is moving really, really fast. And basically, I just have a few seconds, and plus, I'm just taking the camera and I'm just doing this. Like I'm just with the doors off, and I'm just looking behind the camera, like behind the helicopter. I'm looking at the tail, and I'm just doing this, like holding the camera super, super hard. With that, I'm just, again, freezing the action. Oh, here I don't have the exposure time, but I can assure you that it's more than 150. 1/500 of a second, because it's definitely something that is happening super fast, and I only have 1 second while the helicopter is flying right in front of the Empire State with all Manhattan in the background and a little bit of New Jersey on the other side, and that's how I capture an image like this. The same thing, I'm looking for something to freeze the action. I'm going super fast, and I'm showing you all these examples because through my experience with multiple students, I have come to realize that there is always this question like, okay, if I'm going in a car and the car is going super fast, what should I use? And it's like, if you're going in a helicopter, you're going faster. If you're going in a safari, you have to like freeze the action at some point. So in that case, it's important that you consider, and I really want to stress and emphasize that when you want to capture something, if the subject is moving really fast, or you are the one who is moving really fast in front of something, and you want the action to be frozen, you have to use a really short time of exposure. So that's basically what is happening here. I'm just passing in the helicopter in front of the Brooklyn Bridge with Manhattan in the background, and I'm just taking the picture. Let me see. I don't know why it's not getting the information here, but I'm sure as well that it's probably 1/2000 of a second or 1/4000 of a second. That let me just go again back to the same graphic that I was using, and you can see here, this is the time that I'm using just to freeze the image. That's what I'm doing with all these pictures. Same situation, early morning, doors of helicopter. I know I'm gonna pass in front of the highest dunes. These are the highest dunes in the world, the sand dunes in the world. So I know I'm gonna pass there and it will be a matter of a few seconds. So I'm prepared with my camera. I prepare in advance a really short shutter speed, and I'm getting there. And when I see it through the viewfinder, just one picture and that's all. And that helps me to solve a question that many times I get asked, and it's how many pictures I take, or if you really need to take multiple pictures, or just create like a burst of images one after another to get the perfect image. And the truth is that no, many times I just capture one image that is the final one, because I'm just preparing everything with my camera before I take the picture. I know that especially for some of you, if you're just starting, you might be wondering like, okay, but this is taking, like, this is going too fast. I am just even locating where I can move the shutter speed, and reality is that it will take you a while to practice. But that's why we are going very slow, and we will practice a lot during these sessions just to help you understand the camera better. But don't worry, it all takes time. Look, this is before. In the images that I showed you previously, I was the one who was moving faster. I was in a helicopter, or I was just, there was someone who was moving fast. But in this case, for example, the fisherman is about to throw the net. So to me, it's really important to capture the net completely open in a precise moment where it's like almost getting in the whole frame, but it's not out of the framing, and it's still there. So what I'm planning again is just to capture, to stay in the right location, waiting for the right opportunity to capture what I exactly need to do. So if you look here, it's 1250 of a second. That's what I'm using here to freeze this photograph. And now I would really love to have the opportunity to ask you this in person and to discuss it like in real life. What is happening here? I've been talking about freezing, and what is here. So one way that you can start, and I think this is a very good exercise to do if you want to learn photography technique, is to look at images that you like and start understanding and analyzing how they were taken, like trying to understand like details that will give you insights and information of how these pictures were made. If we look at details like this one, as soon as I see the net just opening up and frozen, I can tell like, okay, this is a short exposure time. This is hard to tell. I understand that is from a helicopter, but if you have a little bit of context and you have like, oh, this is taken from a dorsal helicopter, you're like, oh, that has to be frozen as well. You understand that probably this is like also an aerial view, so you also try to freeze it. Same thing, all the situations, you start analyzing these details. And something that I will also suggest you is try to look at images that you like, that create that feeling of, wow, I love this picture. And try to understand, like after you happen to go through all these, like kind of shock of how beautiful it is, try to understand how it was built, how it was created. So if we look at this picture, you will see details and you will think like, okay, the buildings are static, they are there, they are standing. So you will think that this is also a frozen image, but reality is that it's a long exposure one. And how do you know? Because you can start looking at the cars and you will see that there are absolutely no cars. Everything that is there is kind of the ghost of a car that once passed there, but is not anymore. So what you're seeing there, it's a long exposure, because basically what happened was that I was pointing the camera was here, and then a car was coming in front, and the car with the lights on, the camera was taking the picture, and the car passed, and it was only the light that was registered in the camera sensor. If actually you look carefully, there are no cars in this picture. I made all cars disappear, which sometimes it's quite cool. It's quite magic. You can see a little bit here on the right side of the picture. You will see how the cars are quite disappearing, and some are like a little bit stuck there. That means that they were in the middle of a traffic and a traffic jam over there. So that is the way how you start analyzing pictures and understanding what's the best way to capture your images. Why I decided to make a long exposure here and not to freeze the image as I could have done with the other pictures. And actually, while I was standing here, I could also just take a picture and the cars will be completely frozen in the action, and that could have happened there. If you look carefully at what is happening, the sky is completely blue. The sky is what we call the blue hour. That actually it's about to happen also here in New York. I know my screen must be a little bit dark now. It's a challenging time to expose, speaking of exposure, because I'm just getting into this like the sunset and then gets the blue hour. But basically what is happening here is that when the sun goes down or before the sun goes up, you have a very, very intense blue color in the sky. That color means that it's just right before it gets dark. So when you're doing that, you will need more light to be able to capture and to be able to see. And how you do that? Well, again, if we go back all the way to our first graphic, you will see that there are all these times on the right side that goes after 1/15, 1/8 of a second, 1/4, 1/2, 1 second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and both. All these times will create motion and it will receive more light into the sensor. And let me show you, I want us to hear how it sounds like. So first, I'm just gonna set in my camera 1/8,000 of a second, and I want you to hear it. Here we'll go. That's how 1/8,000 of a second sounds like. So that's all the way to the left side. Once again, that's how it sounds. Now I'm gonna go to 1 second, and I want you to hear how it sounds like. 1, 2, 3. All this time, if you can hear, it's a longer time that is taking to do like, let's do 30 seconds. I'm just changing it here. It's capturing. I already pressed the shutter. All this time is capturing the picture. Actually, look, I can move the camera. I wish I could stop the screen, but you can just, yeah, see me a little bit there. I'm just pressing the shutter. All this time, and it's very awkward, you know, 30 seconds, it's a lot of time. It's like I can start talking to Scott, we can discuss again about the Super Bowl. 30 seconds, it's a lot of time. Look at that. There you go. Since the moment I pressed the shutter until now, it was 30 seconds that it was taking the picture, as you can see here. So all the time that I'm doing there, it's allowing the picture to have way more light or less light. So that will control the camera, and that will definitely change how the picture will look like. So the first thing that you have to consider when you're exposing your pictures is that First, yes, you need to capture the right light so it will be visible, but also you need to consider that depending on what setting you will set in your camera, it will change how the result would look like. So let's go back to motion examples. So this is the first one that is very tricky, I know, because it's just moving there. Again, another cityscape. Look at the cars. Well, it's not the cars, it's the lights of the cars that are just here on the, like on the middle of the screen. All these are the cars just moving. This is probably, maybe we can check here. As you can see, this is 13 seconds that the camera is just there, standing, very, very still, waiting for the picture to be taken, and that's all. So how to understand when to take, like when to use one time or another, or how to get the feeling. First reference that I would like to give you is just, again, it's just for reference. If you're going under 1/125 of a second, try, like you can hold your camera handheld and you're able to take the camera without a tripod. If you're gonna use under 1/25, you will have to start getting some support from a chair, from a wall, probably using a monopod or trying to use something that will give some support to the camera so it will be stable, or effectively you will have to use a tripod. So when I'm showing you that I captured this photograph of Dubai over here, these long exposures that I'm showing you, what is happening is that the camera is just holding a tripod that is staying there still for 13 seconds. And let me see this one, 2.5 seconds each picture, because this is a panorama, but we will not get into that. So this is how a long exposure image looks like. And I will need to do that depending on what I'm doing with my camera, depending on the situation that I'm photographing, and of course the result that I want to get. Don't worry, we will get to how to understand what light is best to use. Look at this picture. If you look carefully, you can see frozen legs or frozen feet. But if you look, there is some motion on the side of the boat. What is happening here is that I'm on the boat. The guy is just like chill, relaxing, enjoying the trip in the middle of the jungle. And the boat is moving really, really fast. And what I'm doing is I'm just framing everything just like this. And I'm using probably, let's try to check, 1/13 of a second. 1/13 of a second. And I'm staying super still. And something that I will suggest you to do that, and that I try to do, is that I try to like kind of, I think you cannot see me at all now. So let me just fix a little bit the exposure of my camera, by the way, speaking of exposure. So basically what is happening is that now I can show you. Now this light is super hard, but it's cool that this is happening in a course on how to expose. I think it's useful. I'm just using my control to reduce a little bit, expose the light of the intensity of this light, and now everything is looking better. I'm glad that you can see me now. So what I'm doing is that I'm trying to compress my body. This will be, no, I think you can see me a little bit in the small screen there, but I'm just trying to compress my body, do something like this, and stand very, very, very still, waiting for, you know, the right shot to happen, because it will depend. It's basically, I call it like kind of a dance between what is happening with the boat and what is happening with the camera. So I will have this right motion where something is still frozen, but you can see kind of this motion on the side. So that's how I created this picture. This is another, let's say, kind of a style of how to create a photograph with motion, different to the typical long exposure ones that are more like cityscapes and things that we will see further. Another good example of a motion picture. If you look at the water, some people have asked me if what is happening under the rock is like mist or what is exactly there, or they ask me like, oh, how did you create that? How much Photoshop did you add into this picture? And reality is that I didn't add any Photoshop or any post-processing to the water. Basically, what I'm doing is just leaving the camera for 6 seconds. And after 6 seconds of exposure, the water just keeps moving. So the water comes, the camera is still on a tripod here, and the water is coming. The waves are just coming. In the moment that the water is coming, it's creating the result that you're looking there. That's an effect that I very much like to use when I'm doing landscape photography. I find it very, very useful and beautiful when I have water. Another example, waterfalls. And this is something that I like to show, how photography never shows reality. And it's that you will never see a waterfall like this. Our eyes will be able to just see the water falling, but we will see more consistent water. We don't see it like super delicate and elegant, kind of, you know, kind of a, I like to call it like a web that is just falling there. It's beautiful. But our eyes will never be able to see it like this, because we are kind of freezing the image more constantly than we can do with our camera. So for example, in this picture is 1/20 of a second. I'm just with the camera there in front of the waterfall. The water is just falling, the camera is on the tripod, and you can register how the water is falling there. Another great example taken in LA. Cheers to all the people that is joining today from the West Coast. You have amazing places to photograph. This is a magnificent place that I like very much. And I actually, on my Instagram, I have all the stories how I created this picture. And it was quite funny because I had to try many days. Because again, you have to play with the water and what is happening with the landscape a little bit. So basically what is happening there, I'm with my tripod, I'm standing there, I'm using, let's check, 0.4 of a second. It's almost like 1 second. You could use perfectly 1 second of exposure, camera on the tripod, and I'm waiting for the wave to come just right in front of the camera and come back. But where it's tricky and where I'm telling you that it's cool, like I like the story of how I created this picture, is that sometimes the waves used to come a little bit longer and they will hit me and they will hit the tripod. So the tripod is standing with the camera and the camera moves. And if the camera moves, then everything is blurry and you will not be able to see all details that you have in this picture. So I literally had to stay a long time there, being really patient, just waiting for the right moment, trying once and again until I had the right kind of waves and the amount of water that will move in front of the camera, but will not touch the camera, so the tripod will not move, and I will have a kind of a frozen one. If you look again, it's 0.4 of a second. So let me go back again. I definitely want you to understand this, and I will highly encourage you that if you want to take screenshots of these presentations, you're totally welcome to do it. But basically what I'm talking about with these waves and this water that is moving, or even the guy who's on the boat, are the times here on the right side. First, the monk running, the helicopter, all these pictures, all this left side. Less light, shorter exposure time. When we're talking about this motion, I'm talking about all these times on the right side, longer exposure times, more light that is coming into the camera. Oof, and time is flying. I need to cover a lot today, so I will try to go a little bit faster. Well, as long as we all follow. Another good example of long exposure. I'm standing in front of this beautiful tree. I have the Milky Way in the background, but this is nighttime. And you saw what I just did with my camera. And actually, if you were following from the very beginning this live, you will have noticed that it was like the sunset here in the background. Before, when I was setting all my studio here, I had beautiful light here on my face. And then this light was doing nothing to my face, and you couldn't even see this screen. But the light starts to change. And as it gets darker and darker and darker, you have to get more light into the camera. So basically what I did was that I increased the exposure time. Not now, I did something different for this camera, but what I did for this picture was I increased the exposure time. And actually it was 30 seconds. Do you remember this awkward time that I told you that I was able to talk with Scott about many things? Well, all this awkward time, the camera was just taking the picture. It was just like with a tripod, of course, because if I just hold it with my hands, it will just shake and it will just move. And it gets all these results that it's beautiful, sharp, and nice Milky Way. And some of you will be wondering like, okay, Esteban, but if you're using a long exposure and the Milky Way is moving, why it's still? And this is getting a little bit like more complicated, but basically the answer will be that the Milky Way is so far from us that even that it's moving so slow that the camera can barely notice. But this has some, some special conditions, but we will not get into that now. That's shutter speed. Now, I want to get in the second thing, in the second setting that will modify our captures. And this is the aperture. The diaphragm or the aperture, it's more known as the F number or the aperture or F aperture that you were using. And it's gonna work like this. And you can also see the aperture. So what you're having here is the second setting that will change everything in the camera. And this will work like this. If the aperture opens up, there will be more light, but the background will be more blurry. If the aperture closes, you will have less light, but sharper backgrounds. That's exactly what the graphic is showing here. So I know nowadays we are all more familiar with this because actually our cell phones have this mode that is called like portrait mode, and like it's super cool because you just turn on the camera and suddenly the background is out of focus and it looks super pro, and people love to take pictures like that. And every time phones are bringing more and more and more into the conversation to sell their cameras, they are doing it, part of it with optics and like with these techniques, but part of it is also artificial in post-production. That's why this cinematic mode that we have in our cell phones in the iPhone 13, it's basically that you can like choose where to focus or where the background is going to be sharp and where it's going to be blurry. That's a setting that it's made in post-production, very smart after you capture the video, but that's not how it's going to work in the camera. In the camera, once you choose the point where you want to focus, that's going to be the sharper point where you will actually have. And then the background is going to be a little bit more it will be a little bit more blurry. So how do you control the aperture? In my camera, in my A7R4, I have this dial here. I just move it. And with this, I'm just able to change my aperture. The aperture will depend on the lens that you're using, and we will get to that next lesson when we will be speaking about lenses. But by now, I just want you to know that the more that you open the shutter speed, the more light that you will have. So actually, let me see if you can see it here with my camera. I think you can see a little bit. If I close, I'm just closing my that's a maximum, of course, because I have 30 seconds. That is a little bit crazy. Let me just get, something like, I'm setting 1/125 of a second. So now if you look at my screen, it's all dark. If I start opening my aperture, you will see a little bit more of light. It's hard, it's very dark now. Let me show you again. I close the aperture and you cannot see anything. I open it and there is a little bit more of light in the camera. You can practice the same with your camera and you will just point somewhere where there is light and you will see how to change it. It will depend how to change it depending on the camera that you're using. It's hard for me to guide you in this class without all the models, but you can also check, just Google the model of your camera. I have the Sony A6000, how I modify the aperture, and you will find where to change it, and you will be able to see all these numbers. All these numbers that I'm showing you here, that is the f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, 8, 11, 16, and 22. And aperture, the aperture, I want I want to tell you that probably it's one of the most complicated topics to understand. At least it was to me when I was learning photography, because as humans, we try to connect everything like numbers. It's strange, but you try to connect numbers with the sharp background or with the blurry background. But what I want you to understand is that if you open the aperture, there is more light coming, blurry background. It matters the number. And in the end, you will learn that f2.8 means that the aperture is super wide open, and meaning that the background will be very, very blurry. And then if you close it to 22, it will be super, super, like almost no light, but very sharp background or very sharp foreground. So I will also highly suggest you just to take a screenshot of this graphic and start working on this. And let me show you some examples of how it looks like, because I know that maybe showing you through my small camera is not the ideal. So that's why I have pictures. So here's my beautiful wife. You can see I took this picture of her in our rooftop, and you can see her perfectly in focus, but the background is completely out of focus. If you're familiar with this is New York City, and the building that it's like very like standing there, it's the Empire State. So basically what I'm doing here is that I'm super close to her and I'm opening my aperture because I want to make the background blurry. I want the background not to look like sharp. And the reason for that is that basically I want all the attention to be on her face and the light that is hitting there. And if you look carefully, there is no information because for some reason, one of my cameras is hiding the metadata, which is funny, but no worries. I can tell you that this was taken with a 1.4 of aperture that will go right after f2. And I don't have my lens here, but this was taken with a 85 millimeter 1.4. So I'm just there standing super close to her with my 85 millimeter 1.4, and I'm focusing on her and the background is completely blurry. That's what I mean when I tell you that you can control what is happening in the background. Same situation. I'm taking the picture of this kid. All the cows are in the background. And if you notice, if you look carefully, the cow that is just probably a couple of feet away from him, it's already out of focus. He's in focus, but everything that is going beyond that is getting blurrier and blurrier and blurrier. And the reason for that is that I'm using an f2.8. In this case of these photographs and also the one that I took from Lara, it's not because there is, let's say, like not enough light. I could take it with a close aperture, but I just decided to open it because I wanted to emphasize on the subject that I'm photographing. So that's very important to consider. Again, with this picture, look carefully and you will notice the guy in the front, he is in focus. The kids in the background, they are not in focus. The reason for that, because I'm shooting with 2.8, f2.8. So here you can see. Again, and this, you can use it creatively. And that's what I like a lot about Aperture and how you can use it. I'm using the two kids in the foreground as a way of framing them. And then I'm using the, like the kid in the background. Like it's like the kids in the foreground are framing them and the guy in the background is just posing. Well, he's not posing in reality. He's just like sitting there looking at me, and it's just beautiful how it frames. So what I want to show you with this is that many times, and this is, oh, sorry, I'm spoiling you with all the images that I'm going to show you. Normally we think like, okay, so this means that you can always like make the background blurry only, and the truth is nope, you can also make the foreground blurry depending what you're choosing. I see somewhere here that there is a question that I consider that it's very important. Leslie, thank you for asking. Are you using autofocus or manual focus or a mixture of the two? Great question. just to like quick answer, I'm using autofocus. I'm going to answer you why in the next lesson, where I will be talking about optics and where I will be showing you just lenses and stuff. So I'm going to like stick with us for the next lesson, and I'm going to show you that because I want to get into the details why I do it. Whoop. Don't look at the images. All right, here we go. Harish, the same. Look carefully. The foreground, all this wall is out of focus, and she is in focus in the background, meaning that all the attention is going to her. F2.8, that's what I use here. So there you go. That's the same answer. Landscape, and this is very interesting thing that I want to maybe solve. Some of you have come with this question. Oh, okay, so you just like open the aperture when you want to create a portrait. Right now, everything that I have shown you are portraits, and people think like, okay, I just need to open my aperture when I want to get my background out of focus. And reality is that you can also use it for landscape. Look how I'm using these flowers that are here in front of this beautiful mountain. I'm getting super close. The flowers are out of focus, and it helps me to frame the mountain in the background without getting distracted by these flowers that aren't so beautiful, as you can see. Another example, but this is going to be really different. Look at this, F9. So here I'm doing the opposite. I'm just closing the aperture. I'm just running all the way to the other side. And let me go to my graphic here. I was working first on the numbers on the left here, and now I'm going all the way to the right. And I'm using these numbers, and what you can see here, it's a beautiful landscape with everything in focus. And the reason for that is that I'm just closing the aperture, getting less light, and but getting more depth of field. I know depth of field. What did you say? What is that? Explain me that. I have had questions about it. No worries. That's coming for the next lesson. But basically what is happening here is that I'm getting all this information there. Look at that. Same thing, a landscape. I'm just closing my aperture, probably since I'm reducing the light, because remember that everything that you do will change the light, and it will also change the like what is happening with the like how the image is going to look like. So again, I'm just closing my aperture. I'm taking this picture. Probably I need to have a tripod with me since I'm just reducing a lot of the light, and I also want to get a little bit of you know, like this effect in the water that I didn't get too much because the story of this picture is very peculiar, but unfortunately we don't have the whole time to explain the whole story. But I was rushing to get this picture in this national park. I wasn't allowed to be at sunset. It's a funny story, but not for today. And now look at this landscape. Also, if we look carefully, F9. So if you look, everything is in detail. If you contrast this picture with the first landscape that I show you, that is these mountains, if you look carefully, the trees and the mountains and the water and everything is in focus. Everything has details. But in this case, I like the plants and the bushes there, and I like the mountains. So I don't want to focus on something specifically. I want to show everything. So in that case, I'm just using a very close aperture that it's f9, that will be somewhere in the middle between 8 and 11. All right. Let me see what comes after. Same situation. I'm taking a portrait, but in this case, this portrait is taken with wide angle, and I'm stepping already into next lesson's topics. I'm sorry for that. But basically what I'm doing here is that you can see all the foreground in focus, the mountains also in focus, maybe a little bit less than the foreground, and the monk as well. So everything that is happening there, it's getting in focus thanks to a close aperture. Another situation where I'm just like having the whole background and the people who's walking and everything in focus, so not big deal. And look carefully at this picture. She is in focus and they are also in focus. But what I'm doing here it's F11. So I'm using F11. And why I decided to do it like this? Because I wasn't interested in having her in focus and they out of focus or vice or the opposite. Because the reason is that I want in this picture, I want to have everything sharp. I think both details play a very important role. And normally I will probably have 2.8 and just focus on her or maybe on the girls on the background. But reality is that it was like as I wanted, and probably I wanted to print this picture. I wanted everyone to be sharp and crispy. Same situation. Everything is in focus. The girl that is waiting here, the sun, all these place, beautiful, beautiful place is just like in focus. Same situation. And then we will have this one. That is the third setting that will change everything in our pictures. That is the ISO. The ISO basically is the sensibility of the sensor, like how much sensibility are we adding to our picture. So you remember that earlier on you couldn't see me, and again you cannot see me, you cannot see the background. So let me show you what I can actually do with the ISO if I increase it. But let me first explain you a little bit. If I increase, you will have ISO 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, so on and so on. I call it, and this is not very political, and some photographers will got their own theory, but it's like I call it a cleaner picture, less noise. If you use a lower ISO, like 100, 200, 400, but the more that you increase it, the more the dirtier the picture will look like, and the more noise, the noisier that it will look like. So basically what is happening here, and you can see in the graphic how it gets some texture that actually is not noise, it's just pixels that start to pop up, like they receive a lot of light and they just start to like kind of explode, and they create a color that it's purple, green, or blue, and small pixels get like explode, and that's what produces this noise, because you're forcing the ISO to increase a lot, and when it increases a lot, what it creates is this noise. Okay, so let me just show you how it will work in real life. I love, that this situation with the light is happening. So I can go again to my camera. I'm moving through all the cables here in the studio and the computer, hoping not to show anything to the floor. Let me just take my microphone. And now I'm just gonna change the ISO. Right now I have ISO 640 and I'm gonna increase it. And look, I'm giving more and more light to my setting, and now you're able to see, let me just show you, you're able to see all the city a little bit in the background, and you will see more light on me. Since the light is changing constantly because of what I already told you, it's the sunset time, it's very challenging time to be doing a live when you don't have like complete control under your light conditions. I have to constantly change the light exposure. So that's very cool. And again, my light is too exposed. As you see, like now it was good looking on my face, but it's not looking anymore. Oh, look at that. It's going to be super exposed. You see, I'm just playing with this control here. It's going to be funny. We can make kind of a party. Whew, okay, let's leave it there. You already know my face. What I want to show you, it's two images that I use or that I created with really high ISO. So if you start looking, especially in the shadows, you will see this purple, like kind of magenta pixels, blue and green that are being created in the picture. So you can see it especially on the corners, and it's even more evident in this picture that it's over here. So if you look carefully, you will see that, for example, what this guy is wearing here, it shouldn't look purple or magenta because it doesn't have any magenta color, but I'm forcing the ISO, and this is ISO 10,000. And that's what I'm doing to create this picture, because think about it. It's nighttime, the Milky Way is there, the guy is standing in front of me, and I want to freeze a guy in the nighttime, that it's very, very dark, and everything has to stay, like again, kind of dancing, so everything will work together. many people ask, and I know this question will come to some of you, that is like, what's the maximum, what's the top max you should like, yeah, just go to with your ISO? And my answer to that is like, go as far as you need, because basically it's better to have a picture. I prefer to have this picture with noise. That this is, it's hard for me now, and especially nowadays, like cameras are doing great with noise, but uh, I prefer to go all the way until I need it and to have a noisy picture than just to tell you like, oh, you know, I was in this beautiful place, the Milky Way was there, this guy was in front of me, everything was looking beautiful, but I didn't take the picture because I had to force the ISO. I don't care about that. I prefer to have the noise and to be able to show you the picture. So we're gonna go back a little bit in the next lesson for this, but just as a reminder, but I want you to see what we just talked, that is the exposure, that is how to control the light. We will have, no matter what camera you have, no matter what brand, no matter if you're using your cell phone, no matter if you're using film camera, whatever you're using in photography, this is the main three principles that basically rule photography: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Shorter exposures will create frozen action. Longer exposure will create motion. Open apertures will create less depth of field. We will get to depth of field. Don't worry, I promise you that. I will not fail you. You got my word. And if you close the shutter, the aperture, you will have less light and more depth of field. If you use lower ISO numbers, you will have less noise. Let's call it like cleaner images and clearer images. And if you increase the ISO, you will have way more noise, but more light. Everything, these three settings, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, are controlling the exposure, meaning the light. With these three settings, you control the light. With each one of these settings, you change things on how the image is going to look like. I know it's a lot of information, but we can also start going through these questions, and especially you can start exploring it with your camera, discovering how to control the shutter speed, how to control the aperture, the ISO, going back to this lesson, going back to each place, taking one picture, and I highly recommend you to do that. I don't expect you to understand everything and say like, okay, now I know how to control my camera perfectly and I will go and take amazing pictures. I know it will take time. Start exploring, take a picture, discover it, and say like, this is what happens. This is what it means. When you will start doing that, we can start working on that. And especially when we will have our photo walk here in New York City, we can start practicing with more solid background of how to understand this.
I want to thank our sponsors again, Sony, and a huge thanks to Esteban for spending the day with us and giving us some great information. Thanks, Esteban.
Thanks to you guys. Thank you, and see you soon. See you on Wednesday.
That's it. We'll see you back here Wednesday. So looking forward to everybody joining us back here. That's been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. We'll catch you next time.